Let's go to the first Bible passage the LDS say speaks of the Book of Mormon, and that's in Isaiah 29, 1 through 4. Apostle. Russell M. Nelson wrote in November 2007, quote, "How do scriptures of the Restoration clarify the Bible? Many examples exist. I will cite a few, beginning with the Old Testament." He says Isaiah wrote, and then he quotes Isaiah 29, 1 through 4, which says, "Woe to Ariel, the city where David dwelt. Add ye year to year, let them kill sacrifices. Yet I will distress Ariel, and there shall be heaviness and sorrow, and it shall be unto me as Ariel. And I will camp against thee round about, and will lay siege against thee with a mount, and I will raise forts against thee, and thou shalt be brought down, and thou shalt speak out of the ground, and thy speech shall be low out of the dust, and thy voice shall be as one that hath a familiar spirit out of the ground, and thy speech shall whisper out of the dust." Those are the 4 verses. Speaking of these passages, Apostle Nelson goes on and says, quote, "Could any words be more descriptive of the Book of Mormon? Coming as it did, quote, out of the ground to whisper out of the dust to people in our day." So they quote 4 passages. He uses 2 sentences, out of the ground, whisper out of the dust to people in our day. All I have to say is, you've got to be kidding me, Apostle Nelson. I mean, let's take this text that Nelson uses it and examine it soundly. It's going to be a little dry because we're going to do some scripture talking now, but you can handle it because this is going to help you as you talk. First and foremost, we can't forget that the Old Testament was written by, for, to the children of Israel. It is their history, their covenant with God, and it applies to them, not Mormonism or Mormons. Just look at the first verse of Isaiah 29:1. It says, "Woe to Ariel, the city where David dwelt. Add ye year to year, let them kill their sacrifices." Who or what is Ariel? It is the city where who dwelt? It says right there, where David dwelt. And the city that this speaks of is Jerusalem, the city of David, the city of peace. Did David ever dwell in a city on the American continent? Did David ever dwell in, say, Missouri? No. Isaiah here called Jerusalem Ariel, which in all probability means the hearth of God. And it was only in Ariel where God's hearth existed, the altar where sacrifices were being burned and offered. And it was also the place where God was going to pour his wrath out. So Ariel itself would act as an altar, would seem like an altar because of the bloodshed and the fire that was going to come up because of the persecution that hit Ariel. And fall it did. What Isaiah was saying here is Jerusalem, though it was presently offering sacrifices, would soon become like an altar of sacrifices itself. He was telling them that the city was going to be razed. This prophecy was fulfilled when God used Sennacherib, ruler of the Assyrians in 701 BC, to attack Jerusalem, or Ariel, with such bloodshed and fire that it seemed like it was an altar of fire. Then, in verse 2 and 3 of the 4 that they use, God warns them through Isaiah that though they offer sacrifices, verse 2, yet, says God, I will distress Ariel, and there shall be heaviness and sorrow, and it shall be unto me as Ariel. And I will camp against thee round about, and will lay siege against thee with a mount, and I will raise forts against thee. As a result of this devastating attack authored by God, Jerusalem would be figuratively brought down low to the ground, so effectively that it would be as though it was buried. And this context brings us to verse 4, which the LDS it's the most popular with the LDS and their missionaries and in its misapplication. It says in verse 4, and thou, meaning Jerusalem, shall be brought down, and shall speak out of the ground, and thy speech shall be low out of the dust, and thy voice shall be as of one that has a familiar spirit, out of the ground, and thy speech shall whisper out of the dust. Okay? Bible scholar Albert Barnes, who I love, says of this passage, quote, "The sense here is that Jerusalem, which was accustomed to priding itself on its strength, would be greatly humbled and subdued. Its loud and lofty tones would be changed. It would use the suppressed language of fear and alarm as though it was speaking from the dust, sounding like the voice of those who pretended to have communications with the dead or a familiar spirit." Now, nowhere in Scripture is the term familiar spirit good. It always refers to evil sorceries. So Isaiah is saying that Israel will be made so low that her voice will kind of mimic what the voices are of people who say they talk with familiar spirits. You know what the LDS say about that familiar spirits passage? They try and say that the Book of Mormon, which came out of the ground near Joseph Smith's home, whispering from the dust, that it would have a familiar spirit to that of the Bible. That's the connection they make in that passage. It's utter nonsense, okay? Now, what really is important to understand about this passage is that Apostle Nelson, so embarrassingly assigned as proving the Book of Mormon, is to look at the preceding chapter in chapter 28 of Isaiah verse 15. Here it is the reason that Jerusalem is going to get slayed, as Isaiah was prophesying in chapter 29. You see, the nation of Israel made some sort of pact with darkness, and they believed that this pact would protect them from what Isaiah was telling was going to happen in chapter 29. So in 28, it says, verse 14, "Wherefore hear the word of the Lord, ye scornful men that rule this people, which is in Jerusalem. Because ye have said, we have made a covenant with death, and with hell we are at agreement. When the overflowing scourge shall pass through, it shall not come unto us. For we have made lies our refuge, and understood falsehood have we hid ourselves." From these verses, we have a clear understanding of what Isaiah was saying in chapter 29 and why. The children of Israel had made a covenant with death and a pact with hell, and they thought that the overflowing scourge was not going to hit them. But Isaiah 29, verse 1 through 4, tells us otherwise. God let the overflowing scourge fall upon them so furiously in 701 BC that at the hands of the Assyrians, that they were decimated from the earth. This has nothing at all to do, nothing with the Book of Mormon, even though a man who calls himself an apostle says it does. He is misleading people at best. He's deceiving at worst.